The arrow caught the standing stone 3 inches from Tobias Keller's ear, and the woman who had fired it was already running toward him through the moor mist before he had finished flinching. He had been crouching behind the stone, tracking the prints of something enormous that had torn a shepherd's dog in half the night before, when the snap of a bowstring sent him flat against the granite. He rolled, hand going to his short blade, and then the mist parted and she was there. A full head taller than any woman he had ever seen, her green-gray skin gleaming with the damp, her dark hair braided back from a face that would have stopped a warband cold. She was dressed in fitted warrior's leathers, a close-laced bodice of dark-cured hide that followed every line of her broad, powerful shoulders and narrow waist, greaves strapped over thighs like hewn timber, and a short war cloak the color of peat thrown back over one shoulder. Her tusks were carved with the faint line marks of a ranking warrior. Her eyes were the amber of old whiskey lit from behind. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the shadow that had been sliding through the heather behind him. It was roughly the size of a large cart horse, low to the ground, moving on 6 legs that were jointed wrong forward and backward both, like a question nobody had asked yet. It had no eyes that Tobias could see. It had, however, an abundance of mouths. "Run left," the orc woman said in a voice like gravel poured down a hillside. "I don't take orders from run left." He ran left. The creature lunged right, and her second arrow caught it through the wide, flat dome of its skull. It skittered, screamed a sound that was more pressure than noise, and folded sideways into the heather. It did not get up. Tobias stood still in the mist for a long moment with his heart hammering in his chest. Then he walked back toward her, because he was the border scout assigned to this stretch of moorland, and running away from things was technically not in his commission. She had already retrieved the arrow, wiped the tip clean on the heather, and was examining the body with professional calm. "That one was young," she said. "The territory marker I found 2 miles south was left by something older." "What are you?" he asked. Then, "I mean, who are you?" She looked at him over her shoulder. The amber eyes moved over him with the frank, assessing quality of someone pricing livestock at a market. He was 31 years old, lean and weathered, with a scout's economy of movement and a 3-day beard. Not impressive. He knew he was not impressive. "Sharamph Wildheart," she said. "War hunter, 3rd rank, Greymoor Clan. You are the scout the border lord sent to find what is killing the sheep. And the shepherd, 2 nights ago." That made her go still. "A man is dead, left the same way as the dog." She stood. She was enormously, magnificently tall. The top of his head reached roughly the bottom of her jaw, which she wore like she had been born knowing it was an advantage. Then they sent one man with a short blade and a marking log to handle a hollow-stalker pride. "I didn't know it was a hollow-stalker." "You didn't know it was a hollow-stalker pride," she corrected. "You know what that word means, pride, as in more than one." Tobias looked at the dead creature in the heather and thought about the prints he had been following. He had counted 6 sets. He looked back at her. "How many?" "The one you were about to become a meal for makes 5 dead. There is at least 1 elder still moving, possibly 2. And you're hunting them alone." "I was hunting them alone," she said, with a point in her voice that was aimed directly at the word "was." "Now, apparently, I am hunting them with a border scout who cannot hear a 6-legged predator stalking him through wet heather. To be fair, they don't make any sound. They make plenty of sound to those who know how to listen." She picked up the short recurve bow that had been leaning against the stone and checked its cord. "Go back to your border lords. Tell them the hollow-stalkers will be dealt with. My commission is to deal with them. Your commission is going to get you eaten. Then I'll get eaten efficiently." He held out his hand. "Tobias Keller, scout, 3rd year, Dunmore Company." She looked at his hand the way people look at things that might be a trap. Then she took it. Her grip was extraordinary, 3 of her fingers the width of 2 of his, and she was careful with it in a way he noticed. The way very strong things are careful around things that are not. "You have tracked 6 sets of prints," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." "Then you are not useless." She released his hand. "You will stay behind me." "Absolutely not." "You will stay slightly behind and to my left," she amended, and started walking north into the mist before he could argue the point further. That was how it began. They spent 4 days on the moorland before they found the Elder's den. It was not 4 easy days. The Greymoor moor was vast and gray-green, and threaded with standing stones that the old people had put up before anyone now living had drawn breath. The mist came in off the upland every morning and did not lift until noon. At night the temperature dropped hard enough to ice the pools that collected in the peat hollows. Tobias knew this ground the way a man knows his own kitchen. He knew where the safe crossings were, where the false paths led into sink peat that would swallow a boot, where the old shepherd's markers stood along the drove roads. That knowledge turned out to matter considerably. On the second morning, Sharamph stepped off a path at his word and avoided going knee-deep into a black peat bog. She looked at the ground she had not sunk into and then at him, and something in her assessment of him shifted. It was small, that shift, but he caught it. They sheltered at night in the old crofts, scattered across the moor, small stone houses that the hill farmers had left empty over the hard years, their turf roofs half-caved, their hearths still serviceable. The first night they lit a fire separately at opposite ends of the single room and said almost nothing. The second night they cooked together over the same flame from the jerked mutton and dried field peas that Tobias carried, and the dark flatbread that Sharamph produced from a wax-sealed pack. And the conversation came in short, practical bursts. The behavior patterns of hollow-stalkers, the way the old clans had hunted them before the moors were broken up into border lord territory, what the shepherd had seen before he died according to the statements Tobias had taken. On the third night she told him about the Greymoor Clan without being asked, which he understood later meant she had decided he was worth telling. The Greymoor Clan was small, had been smaller since the battle at Dunrock Crossing 6 years ago, where they had stood as treaty allies for the border lords against an eastern incursion, and lost a third of their warriors. The clan held its territory 10 miles north of the standing stone boundary, on the far edge of the moor where the land rose into scrub pine ridges. They were not precisely welcomed in the border towns, which was a delicate way of saying that in Dunmore Market they would not serve her at the baker's stall, and had called the watch twice. He had listened without saying anything placating because he had seen it himself, and platitudes were an insult to someone who had to live it. What he said was, "The baker's an idiot. His bread is bad anyway. The miller's wife 3 stalls down makes better, and she won't give you trouble." Sharamph had looked at him with those amber eyes for a long, considering moment. "You know this from personal experience. I'm not exactly Dunmore's favorite citizen either. I grew up on the south edge in the lean houses. They only hired me for this commission because nobody else wanted 3 weeks in the mist counting sheep kills. And yet here you are." "And yet here I am," he agreed and prodded the fire. She was watching him. He felt it across the breadth of the croft, steady as the firelight itself. "You are not afraid of me," she said. "I was for the first 10 minutes. And then you saved my life and I got distracted from the fear." She made a sound in the back of her throat that he was slowly learning was the beginning of a laugh that she did not quite give voice to. He had been cataloging those sounds. He had been thinking about that cataloging rather more than was strictly professional. Sharamph Wildheart was not easy to look away from. She moved through the heather with the precision of something that had been designed expressly for this terrain, her leathers dark with moor damp, her braided hair catching the gray light. And she was frankly the most compelling thing on this moorland or any other that he had encountered in 3 years of solo ranging. He was aware, with the bluntness of a man who spent a great deal of time alone with only honest thoughts for company, that he was in serious danger of embarrassing himself. She caught him watching on the 4th morning. He had been marking a print in the soft ground and looked up, and she was looking back at him from 20 yards away with an expression he could not entirely read. Not displeasure, something more complicated than that. He went back to marking the print, but his face was warm and the morning was cold, and he suspected the math on that was fairly obvious. They found the elder den at midday on the 4th day. It was set in a natural hollow behind a cluster of the tallest standing stones on the north ridge, the entrance concealed by an overhang of peat and dead heather that had felted together into something like a roof. The hollow-stalker that occupied it was twice the size of the young ones, its carapace thickened and ridged, its many mouths set in permanent folds of threat. It had killed at minimum 3 more sheep in the last 2 nights, judging by the bones Sharamph identified just outside the entrance. There was also, in that moment of crouching together behind the last stone and looking down into the den, a second set of prints coming in from the east. 2 elders, she said very quietly, her mouth close to his ear because she was taller and the stone was low. He could feel the warmth of her breath against his jaw. 1 inside, 1 ranging. The ranging one will come back tonight. We need to take them separately. Yes. Can you take the one in the den before the ranging one returns? She considered. Yes, but it will be loud. The ranging one will come back fast if it hears. Then I'll run north and draw it, Tobias said. Fast enough to get its attention, slow enough to stay ahead of it, lead it to the peat sink near the old wall stones. She turned her head to look at him. They were very close together behind the stone, and her turning brought her face nearly level with his. She was crouching, and he was tall for a human, and the distance between them was 4 inches at most. He held still and tried to look like a man with a sensible plan rather than a man who was acutely aware of every point of nearness. You will lead a hollow-stalker elder through the North Moor in the mist, she said. I know that ground better than anything alive. You might. I've walked it for 3 years. I know exactly where the peat sink is, and I know the ground stays firm for someone who knows the path. An elder hollow-stalker following blind on 6 legs goes straight down. It won't be able to track by smell if I keep moving. They hunt by motion. She stared at him. You are entirely serious. It's a reasonable plan. It is a reckless, barely reasonable plan that has a non-trivial chance of getting you killed. Counterpoint, what's your plan? She was quiet for a moment. I was going to try to take them both with arrows and hope the ranging one came back before the dead one drew others. That also has a non-trivial chance of getting you killed. I am considerably harder to kill than you are. I'm considerably faster on this terrain than anything that's not human. He held her gaze. We split the work. We both go home. She looked at him for another long moment, amber eyes moving over his face with that frank, cataloging quality. Up close she was even more striking. The line of her jaw was strong and clean. The carved marks on her tusks were small and precise, and there was a fine scar over her left brow that cut through the dark arch of it in a way that made her look like she had been arguing with something very sharp and come out ahead. Stay on firm ground, she said. It came out very quietly. I will. If the ground changes under you, climb a stone. It cannot climb. I know. Tobias. She said his name for the first time, and it was different in her mouth than in anyone else's, slower, more considered, like she had been keeping it in reserve. Stay on firm ground. I will, he said again. You go in 3 counts from my whistle. He gave her the whistle 2 minutes later and he ran. The North Moor was his. He had ranged it in every season, in every weather, and he ran it now the way a man runs a room he has crossed 1,000 times in the dark, not seeing it, knowing it. Behind him, the hollow-stalker elder came out of the heather like a bad thought, huge and wrong-shaped and absolutely silent, drawn by the movement and the warm displacement of air his running body left in its wake. He could not hear it. He could feel it, the way the moor felt different at his back, a pressure of attention that raised every hair on him. He ran harder. The old wall stones rose out of the mist ahead of him, 4 of them in a loose cluster, the peat sink lying dark and still on the northern side. He had crossed it once by accident in his first week on the moor, and had gone into his knee before catching a root. He had marked it on his log and given it a wide berth ever since. It was roughly 4 meters across and covered with a crust of dried peat and dead heather that looked exactly like firm ground. He turned sharp right, 20 feet from the sink, and went up the first wall stone like a cat, hands and feet finding the holds, and came to a stand on the top of it and turned around. The elder hollow-stalker came out of the mist at a rolling, nightmarish gallop, and it was enormous and it was coming straight at him, and for 3 terrible heartbeats he thought the plan had been deeply wrong. Then its front 3 legs hit the crust of the peat sink simultaneously, and it went through it like a stone through a paper floor. The sound it made was hideous. The moor swallowed it the way the moor swallowed everything it wanted to keep. Tobias stood on the wallstone with his chest heaving and listened to the moor go quiet. Behind him, somewhere south through the mist, an arrow sang once, then silence. He climbed down from the stone and sat in the heather and waited for his hands to stop shaking. They took a while. He used the time to check that his short blade was still in its sheath, that his marking log was dry, and that all the parts of him that had been attached at the start of the morning were still attached. They were. He was lucky and he knew it. He heard her before he saw her, the steady, unhurried tread of someone who did not need to rush because the thing she had been hurrying toward was finished. She came out of the mist in the early afternoon light, her bow on her back, one hand pressed flat to her left side where the elder had apparently gotten very close before the arrow that killed it had landed. Her expression was calm. The blood on her palm was dark. Tobias was on his feet before he knew he had stood up. "Show me," he said. "It is shallow. Show me anyway." She lifted her hand and let him look. The cut was a 4-inch slash across the lower ribs, deep enough to need binding but not deep enough to have touched anything vital. He could see that by the color and quality of what was there. He had enough field medicine for this. "Sit down," he said. "You do not." "Sit down, Sharamph." She sat down slowly against the wallstone and watched him with those amber eyes as he took the field kit from his pack. He cleaned the cut with the strongest spirit he carried, and she did not flinch, which he had expected. He did not make conversation while he worked, which she appeared to appreciate. He bound it clean and tight with the linen strips he carried, and tied the end with the simple flat knot his old field master had taught him in his first year of scouting. When he was done, she looked down at the binding and then at him. "You are fast on that ground," she said. "I heard the elder go down from inside the den." "Fast enough," he said. "You were frightened, absolutely terrified." Something moved in her face, not quite a laugh, something more open than that. "Yet you ran anyway." "Well," he sat back on his heels in the heather. "You told me to stay on firm ground. I had to at least try to justify the confidence." She looked at him for a long time in the thin afternoon light. The mist was lifting at last, pulling back from the standing stones in long, slow sheets, and the moorland was opening up around them into its true scale, vast and gray-green and ancient and strange. Somewhere on the north wind a curlew called. "The hollow-stalkers are finished," she said, "both elders and all the young. The pride is destroyed. We should do a sweep tomorrow to confirm." "Yes," she paused, "that is sensible. We could make the sweep north toward your territory. You could go home from there." "Yes," she said again, but she did not say it like someone planning to go home. She said it like someone considering whether she wanted to. They went back to the last croft that night, the one on the near north edge of the moor, and Tobias built up the fire high because of the cold, and because she had lost blood, whatever small amount that was, and because the day had been extreme, and some comforts were simply correct after a day like that. He made strong tea with the dried herbs he carried and put it in the tin cup without ceremony and handed it to her, and she took it. "Your commission ends when you report the hollow-stalker pride destroyed," she said. "It does. And then you go back to Dunmore. For a few days, pick up the next commission. There's usually something along the Greymoor boundary." She held the tin cup in both hands and looked at the fire. The firelight was very good on her. It caught the planes of her face and the gold in her amber eyes, and the carved marks on her tusks, and made the whole of her look like something cast in bronze by a craftsman who knew exactly what he was doing. Tobias looked at the fire with great determination. "The boundary has been troubled for 2 years," she said. "Since the hollow-stalkers moved south, the usual game patterns have shifted. There are other things moving. There are always other things moving. Things that a single scout with a short blade will not manage alone. Things that a single war hunter with a bow and a recent rib wound will not manage alone either, he said and looked at her. The amber eyes met his. The fire popped. Outside the moor was dark and still and enormously wide, and in here it was warm and close, and the space between them on the stone bench they were both seated on had shrunk to something approximately meaningful. The Greymoor Clan has a way station, she said carefully. On the north edge, an old stone structure. We use it for long-range hunts. It has a hearth that works and a roof that mostly does not leak. That sounds comfortable. There is a catch. The amber eyes did not move from his. The catch is that I would need to tell my war leader I was bringing a human partner back from the South Moor. Partner. She had used that word with the precision of someone who had been turning it over for a while before releasing it. Tobias Keller had been alone on this moorland for 3 years and alone before that in most of the ways that mattered. He had a commission and a bedroll and a good sense of direction, and very little else. He was not a man who received invitations. He was not a man who expected to be chosen for anything beyond what he was technically qualified for. He took a careful breath. I have the next 3 weeks free before my next commission, he said. I know how long it takes to file a hollow-stalker report. I could do a sweep of the north boundary, document what's moving. Could, she said, the documentation would be useful. It would give your clan good territorial data for the season. It would. And I would need a guide on the north side of the boundary, someone who knows that ground the way I know the south. She held his gaze steadily. There was something warm in it now, something that she was not hiding with any great effort, and Tobias felt it the way you feel a fire when you have been cold for a long time, all at once in the chest, with a sort of stunned gratitude. I know that ground, she said. Good, he said. Then it's a reasonable plan. The corner of her mouth lifted. It was not quite a laugh. It was the real thing, brief and unguarded, and it was extraordinary. You said that about the peat sink. And it worked. She looked at him a moment longer and then looked back at the fire, and both of them were quiet, and the quiet was the comfortable kind, which was its own kind of answer to a question neither of them had put into words yet. They swept the South Moor the next morning as planned, found no surviving hollow-stalkers, and turned north. Crossing the standing stone boundary was, technically, leaving his assigned territory. Tobias marked it in his log and added a field note about extended tracking sweep, partnership with allied clan hunter, which was a description that was accurate in some ways and incomplete in others, and put his log away. The North Moor was different from the South Wilder, less traveled, the heather higher and the peat bogs more numerous and less mapped. She moved through it differently too, with an ease that his Southmoor confidence did not quite match, and she watched him find his footing without comment but with an attention that was unambiguously careful. She pointed out the soft ground before he could walk into it. She identified the stones that had been used as trail markers by her clan. She did not call any of it teaching. She just said the things and let them be useful. On the second day of the North Crossing, they came down off a ridge into a shallow vale where the standing stones were so thick they formed something approaching a corridor, and the way station was at the end of it. It was old, stone-built with a low door in the older style, the lintel barely clearing Tobias's head as he stepped through. Sharamph had to duck sharply to enter, dropping her chin all the way to her chest to clear the stone above her, and then straightening inside. The movement was so practiced it had gone automatic, and that was how Tobias knew she had used this place often and always ducked and never thought twice about it. He looked at the door frame. He looked at the interior, which was perhaps 7 feet at its center where the ridge of the roof ran, perfectly comfortable for her, and the low entry that had made her duck. He walked the building. 1 room, hearth in the north wall, sleeping platform built against the east wall, a narrow storage alcove. A good solid structure, built by people who knew stone and knew moors, but the door was wrong. The door had been built for someone else's people in someone else's time. He filed that away. Not urgently, just as a fact he knew now. The way station was close enough to the Greymoor war camp, a cluster of long houses and hide tents on the high ridge 2 miles northeast. that two of Sharamph's clansmen came down on the first evening to see who had arrived. They were large, both of them, and neither of them was glad to see a human on clan-adjacent ground, and they said so in clan speech to Sharamph, while watching Tobias with the frank assessment of people deciding how much trouble it would be to solve a problem. Sharamph answered them at length. Tobias stood outside the way station in the evening light and studied the ridge and noted the trail approaches and waited. And after a few minutes of conversation, both clansmen looked at him differently, not warmly, not welcomingly, but with the particular look of people who have been told something that requires them to revise a conclusion. The younger one glanced at Tobias's belt and at the pack he carried and at the marking log that was visible at his hip and said something short. "He wants to know if you are the scout who tracked the hollow-stalkers," Sharamph translated, returning to stand beside him. "Yes," she said so. The clansman's expression did not become friendly, but it became something closer to neutral, which was a better outcome than several alternatives. They said their goodbyes and went back up the ridge, and Sharamph watched them go. "You told them about the peat sink," he said. "I told them you are an effective partner and a reliable scout. The hollow-stalker pride has been a problem for the clan for 2 years. Killing it earns significant good faith." "How much good faith?" "Enough that you will not be asked to leave tonight." She paused. "Possibly tomorrow night either." He laughed, genuinely, the first real full laugh he had produced in some weeks. She looked at him when he laughed in a way that he caught, and did not quite know what to do with something unguarded in it, something that went slightly soft around the edges of her composed expression. "Come in," she said. "I will start the fire." They settled into the way station with a practicality that felt entirely natural and slightly startling in how natural it felt. She knew where the stored firewood was, the cached provisions, the spare bedding folded into the storage alcove. He made himself useful by checking the roof for gaps and patching 2 of them with the shaped turf he found stacked against the outside wall, and by setting the kind of tripwire perimeter alerts at the trail approaches that were a scout's standard precaution, and that she observed with an interest that suggested she was cataloging them. On the 3rd night in the way station, she told him about Dunrock Crossing. She had not planned to. He could see that plainly. It came out at the end of a long evening conversation that had been moving through other things, like water finding a lower level. And by the time it arrived, she was already saying it without having chosen to begin. She had been 23 at Dunrock. She had already been ranked 2nd. She had gone into the crossing battle alongside her war leader as the 2nd blade and come out the other side with her war leader dead at her hands, not from the enemy, but from a mercy kill when he had taken a wound that made dying slowly the only other option. He had asked her for it in the older tradition, and she had given it, and carried it after the way you carry things that were right and terrible at the same time. Tobias did not say anything placating. He did not say it was brave or that she had done right, because she already knew both of those things and neither of them was the point. He said, "What was his name?" She looked at him. "Harak. Tell me about Harak." She was quiet for a moment, and then she talked for 20 minutes about her war leader, about who he had been and what he had valued and how he had laughed, and Tobias listened to all of it without interrupting, and at the end there was a long quiet and the fire had gone low. "No one has asked me that before," she said. "They should have." She looked at him across the dying fire, and he looked back at her, and the thing between them that had been growing in the charged silences and the near touches and the weight of her amber eyes on him in the mist was pressing very hard against whatever boundary had been keeping it at arm's length. He did not close the distance. She was holding something fragile that she had just given him, and he was not going to rush it. But he held her gaze, and he did not pretend the moment was nothing, and she seemed to understand what that meant, because she nodded very slightly, one slow dip of her chin, and that felt like a thing decided. The trouble came from the south 8 days after they had crossed the boundary. It arrived in the form of a mounted party, 4 men from the Dunmore Border Company. A 5th man, who was some kind of official Tobias, did not immediately recognize, and a warrant that had been issued for the detainment of a green-skinned raider allegedly responsible for 3 sheep kills and the murder of one shepherd on the South Moor. They came to the way station mid-morning when Tobias was half a mile north on a trail survey and Sharamph was alone. He heard the shouting from the ridge and he ran. What he came back to was this: the 4 company men had roped her. Not without cost 2 of them were on the ground, and one of them was going to be favoring his right arm for some weeks. But there were 4 of them, and the warrant gave them the legal cover they needed to call any resistance by an orc on border-adjacent land an act of aggression, and they had brought a 5th rope. One was around her wrists, bound behind her, and she was being walked at spear point away from the way station door. The official was reading from the warrant out loud to no one in particular, in the rote way of men who need the words to make the thing legal. Tobias came down off the ridge at a run and got between Sharamph and the spear before the company men had finished processing that someone had arrived. "Keller," said the nearest one. He recognized the man Davin, a company veteran of middling skill and below middling judgment. "Stand aside. Border company business." "Read me the warrant," Tobias said. He said it absolutely flatly, in the voice he used when he was informing the terrain that it was not going to win today. He had placed himself directly between Sharamph and the spear point, close enough to the spear that its tip was approximately 8 inches from his chest, and he was making absolutely no move to indicate that he intended to be anywhere else. Sharamph was very still behind him. He could feel that stillness. Warrant names an orc female, war class markings, green-gray skin, responsible for the hollow-stalker kills misattributed to, the official faltered. "Read me the part where it says she killed the shepherd," Tobias said. "Keller, this is not I filed the death report. I have the marks, the site description, and the hollow-stalker biology notes in my log. This woman did not kill the shepherd, because the shepherd was killed by a 6-legged predator that she and I spent 9 days hunting and destroying. I have field notes covering every day of that hunt, including the testimony of 2 Greymoor Clan witnesses who are 2 miles north on that ridge right now." He did not look away from Davin. "I can also tell you that she received that wound on her left side, which you are welcome to inspect, from the elder hollow-stalker she killed in close quarters to protect your border lord's sheep count. So I am asking you again to read me the warrant." The official had stopped reading. Davin looked at Tobias and then, reluctantly, at the other men, who were looking at each other with the expression of people who had been very confident about something and were now somewhat less so. "The warrant was drawn on witness testimony," Davin said. "Whose witness testimony?" "The miller's wife and 2 others who reported an orc matching this description on the South Moor during the period of the kills. She was on the South Moor, hunting the things that were doing the killing. As a war hunter, at her own initiative because your border lords couldn't be bothered to send more than 1 scout." Tobias took a step forward. "Cut the ropes, Keller. I will file an interference report that will reach the border lord's office before you get back to Dunmore if you do not cut those ropes in the next 30 seconds. I will attach my full field log. I will name every man here, and I will personally ride to the Dunmore court and stand in front of whoever needs standing in front of and tell them that your company arrested the hunter who destroyed a hollow-stalker pride that your company failed to handle for 2 years." He held Davin's gaze without moving. "Cut the ropes." The silence on the moor was enormous. The mist was high today and the standing stones were visible all the way to the ridge, and there was nobody anywhere near them except these men in this moment. Davin looked at the official. The official looked at his warrant. The warrant, it appeared, did not give him useful advice about field logs and testimony and hollow-stalker biology. "Cut her loose," Davin said. One of the company men did it quickly, avoiding looking at either of them. The ropes fell. Sharamph did not move immediately. She stood where she was and brought her hands around in front of her and looked at her wrists and then at Tobias's back. He had not turned around. He was still watching the company men, making sure the spear came down and the horses were pointed south before he relaxed. The company men left. The official rolled up his warrant and left with them and did not speak again. Tobias watched until they were gone into the mist, and then he turned around. She was looking at him in a way he had never seen her look at anything. "You could have lost your commission for that," she said. "I could have. You put yourself in front of a spear for me. You put yourself between me and a hollow-stalker 10 days ago. I'm keeping a running tally." He checked his hands. They were steadier than last time. He was getting better at the aftermath. "Are you hurt?" She held up her wrists. They were bruised, but not badly. She did not look at her wrists. She looked at him. "You knew what you were doing," she said. "The field log, the report. I always write thorough field notes. You wrote thorough field notes about me." He met her eyes. "From the first day," he said quietly. "Everything you did, everything that mattered." The amber in her eyes had gone very dark and very warm. She closed the space between them in 2 long strides, and when she was close, she stopped and reached out and put one enormous, careful, gentle hand against the side of his jaw. And the touch was so precise and so deliberate and so completely unlike anything that had ever been directed at him before that it short-circuited whatever he had been preparing to say. "Tobias Keller," she said, in her gravel and amber voice. "Yes," he said, because it seemed to cover everything. She kissed him, and it was one of those kisses that does not ask permission so much as make a declaration, certain and unhurried and warm. And he kissed her back with the full weight of 12 days of mist and near misses and firelight, and the exact knowledge of how very badly he had wanted this, and how little he had expected it to happen. When it broke, she was still holding his jaw, and he had one hand at her waist and one at her shoulder, and she was looking down at him with an expression of absolute clarity. "I have been thinking about doing that since the 2nd day," she said. "Only the 2nd day. The 1st day you were nearly eaten. I was managing priorities." He laughed, pressed his forehead briefly to her sternum because it was the most available part of her and he needed a moment of something solid, and felt her hand move from his jaw to the back of his neck, and hold there with the same careful strength she had used for the handshake on the first morning. "We should send word to my clan," she said, "before the company men decide to try again with a larger warrant." "Yes." He pulled back enough to look at her. "I'll have the report written and ready to send before dark. I can get a writer to Dunmore by dawn. And I will speak to my war leader tonight." She studied him. "He will want to meet you." "Is that a warning?" "It is information." The corner of her mouth came up. "He is not unpleasant. He simply needs to understand what you are." "And what am I?" She looked at him for a long, warm moment, amber eyes full of something she was not hiding from him anymore. "Mine," she said simply and completely, "if you agree to it." He agreed to it, clearly, completely, without qualification. The following days were dense with consequence. Tobias wrote the most thorough field report of his career, which ran to 11 pages and included a biological sketch of the hollow-stalker elder that he had rendered from memory, a timeline of events cross-referenced with his daily log entries, and a sworn statement identifying Sharamph Wildheart as a critical allied partner operating in good faith on behalf of border security. He sent it south by fast rider. He also wrote, separately, a personal letter to the senior commission officer at Dunmore, which was considerably shorter and somewhat more direct about the warrant and the company behavior, and sent that south too. Sharamph went north to the war camp and spoke to her war leader, a broad, gray-scarred veteran named Oreth who had been with the clan for 4 decades and had seen most of what the world had to offer and had opinions about most of it. She came back in the evening without apparent crisis. She told Tobias that Oreth wanted to meet him in 2 days when the full hunting council would be present, which was either a significant honor or a significant trial and possibly both. "What should I do?" Tobias asked. "Tell the truth. Answer directly. Do not minimize your role in the hollow-stalker hunt and do not exaggerate it either. They will know the difference." She paused. "And do not let any of them see you be afraid of them." "What if I am afraid of them?" "Then manage it the way you manage everything else." She met his eyes with perfect composure. "I will be there." He went to the council meeting in his cleanest clothes and his best boots, and with his field log in his pack and his mind arranged around the simple fact that these people had lost a third of their warriors at a battle fought on behalf of a border lord treaty, and that Sharamph had killed her war leader with her own hands because she had loved him and he had asked her to, and whatever else was true about this situation. These were people who deserved to be looked at plainly. Orath was 60 if he was a day, built like a stone wall that had been there since before any of the current fences, with a deep carved scar across his throat that had healed white. He sat in the center of the council like something that had grown there. The other 6 council members were arranged around him in a loose half-circle, and every one of them was watching Tobias with the precise attention of people for whom watching carefully was a professional skill. Sharamph stood at the edge of the circle, not between Tobias and the council, but close, which was itself a statement. Orath asked him questions in heavily accented common speech. What had he seen? What had he done? What was his training? What did he know of the boundary territories? What were his intentions? Tobias answered each one truthfully and without hedging, and without performing humility or performing confidence. He was what he was, a third-year border scout of no distinguished birth and moderate practical skill, who knew the South Moor, and had found a partner who knew the North Moor, and together they had handled a problem that had needed handling. At the end of it, Orath looked at him for a long, weathered moment and then said something in clan speech that brought a ripple through the council, not hostile, more like a collective shift of assessment. Sharamph translated afterward, walking back to the way station in the evening. He said, "You smell of the moor." He means it as a compliment. It means you are genuine to the place. Is that enough? She considered. It is a significant amount. The hollow-stalker work was already considerable. You standing in front of the company spear was, Davin is known to the clan. He has caused us problems before. Several council members had personal reasons to find his discomfiture satisfying. She glanced at him. You made something like friends today, not enemies. Orath told me privately that the man who put himself between a spear and his best war hunter was either brave or foolish, and he would watch to see which. And his conclusion, he said probably both. She looked sideways at him with that warm amber regard. I told him that was my conclusion as well. High praise, Tobias said. The highest I know how to give, she said, and took his hand as they walked, threading her large fingers through his with a carefulness and a certainty that undid him entirely. The Dunmore Commission office responded to his report and letter within the week. The warrant was formally retracted. The company captain filed a note apologizing for the actions of his men in terms that were bureaucratic and uninspired but legally binding. Tobias's commission was not only intact but extended. The border lord wanted the North Moor documented, which was a convenient authorization for exactly what he and Sharamph were already doing. It gave them another 2 months on the moor together. Properly authorized, their collaboration was no longer just a field improvisation. Tobias wrote it up as an Allied Party Survey Commission, and Sharamph told him dryly that this was the most paperwork she had ever been adjacent to. They worked the North Moor systematically, mapping the game corridors and the hollow-stalker vacated territory and the new predator movements that had started to fill the space where the Pride had been. There were things that were not dangerous and things that were somewhat dangerous, and one thing, found on the deep north ridge in the 3rd week, that was dangerous enough to require a plan. It was a storm bear, not the ordinary kind. The ordinary kind were large and ill-tempered. This one was old and scarred and had been displacing every other large predator on the north ridge for 2 seasons, and 3 of Sharamph's clansmen had encountered it and come back with varying numbers of their original limbs. It had taken up residence near one of the clan's primary hunting routes, which was cutting off access to the northern pine forest where the best winter game ran. Orath had been looking for someone willing to handle it for 6 months. He was not, he made clear, asking Tobias Keller to be that person. He was simply stating the problem. Tobias and Sharamph had a conversation that night in the way station that followed a path both of them could see from the beginning and neither of them deflected from, because they had learned each other well enough by now to know that deflecting was a waste of the good time they had. "Storm bears are not hollow-stalkers," she said. "There is no ambush strategy, no terrain trick. It has to be confronted. I know, and I know that your bow can take it if you get the right angle. The right angle is from above, from the ridge spine, while it is occupied with something else." She met his eyes, "something that draws it and holds its attention. I can do that, Tobias. You know I can." "I know you are willing to," she said, and her voice had something in it that was not argument, something more complicated and more open. "I know you will walk toward the thing instead of away from it. I have watched you do it. That's what you need." "That is what I need," she said, and the sentence had a weight in it that went beyond the storm bear, and they both felt it. She reached across the small table between them and put her hand over his. "After this is done." "After what is done?" "After the storm bear is handled and the North Moor survey is filed and your extended commission runs out." She held his gaze steadily. "I want you to stay." He turned his hand under hers and held on. "Stay where?" "Here, on the moor, on the boundary. Your knowledge and mine together make something neither of us is separately. The clan needs boundary work. The border company needs someone who can operate in allied territory." She paused. "And I would like to stop calculating how long before you leave." "I have been calculating the same thing," he said. "Then stop." Her thumb moved across his knuckle. "I am not modest about what I want, Tobias. I want you where I can reach you. I want to work beside you. I want—" She stopped. "Tell me," he said. The amber eyes held his without flinching. "I want to stop sleeping on a separate platform." The fire was low and the moor was dark outside, and it was very quiet and warm in the way station, and he was entirely certain he had not misheard her. "Then come here," he said. She came to him, and the night was long and warm and entirely theirs, and the moor was vast and dark outside, and neither of them were thinking about the moor. In the morning she braided his hair back from his face while he was still half asleep, a short practical braid at the back that he could not see but could feel, and she told him it was a Greymoor custom for a partner going into danger. It kept the hair from the eyes, and it also meant something in the older tradition that she did not translate but that he understood from the way she did it. "Today?" he asked. "Today," she said. They went to the North Ridge. The storm bear was real and enormous. He had seen bears before, the ordinary kind, brown and huge and grumpy, and this was something else. It was the color of dark iron, deeply scarred, and it moved with a weight that made the ridge tremble slightly. Standing, it would have been level with Sharamph's head, which gave it something like 7 feet at the shoulder, and its forepaws were larger than Tobias's head, which he did not spend a great deal of time contemplating. He walked out onto the open slope with his short blade at his belt, a long hunting spear borrowed from the clan's armory in his hands, and the braided weight of his hair against the back of his neck, and he made enough noise on approach that the storm bear heard him before it smelled him and turned. It turned, and it saw him, and it decided he was the problem. He ran, not away, diagonally toward the ridge, drawing it under Sharamph's position, keeping the angle right, watching the ground because the north ridge was rocky and uneven, and a stumble here would be the end of the conversation. The bear came behind him like a moving cliff, and he could feel the impact of its steps through his boots. Sharamph's first arrow hit the moment he cleared the line. The second hit before the bear had finished reacting to the first. The third he heard as he was scrambling up the nearest boulder, turning on it with the hunting spear braced, looking down at a storm bear that had stopped moving with 3 arrows in exactly the right configuration, the configuration she had described to him the night before with the same precision with which she described everything that mattered. He stood on the boulder, and the bear was still, and the ridge was very quiet. From above and to the left, 60 feet up the ridge spine, Sharamph stood with her bow in her hand and looked down at him. The morning light was on her gray-gold and clean, the mist all gone today, and the North Moor was enormous behind her, pine ridges and open fell and standing stones, and she was silhouetted against it like something from a story someone had told when he was young, when he still believed stories were true. He raised the hunting spear. She raised her bow. Across the distance they looked at each other, and that was all it was, and it was everything. The clan council confirmed the kill the following morning. Orath inspected the storm bear and the arrows, and said something long in clan speech that the assembled hunters received with a kind of collective satisfaction. Sharamph translated the relevant parts. The hunting route was open. The North Pine Forest was accessible for the winter game season. 6 months of constraint on the clan's territory were ended. And then Orath said something that Sharamph did not translate immediately. Tobias waited. "He is asking," she said finally, in a voice that was careful and a little unsteady in a way he had not heard before, "whether you have been named." Named. In the clan's custom, a person who hunts with a Greymoor warrior 3 times, who faces death beside them 3 times, may be given a clan name. It is a formal acknowledgement. It cannot be undone. She paused. Hollow-stalker. The company men and the spear, today that is 3. He looked at Orath. The old war leader was watching him with patient, flinty attention. "Is it an honor?" Tobias asked. "It is a very significant one," Sharamph said. "It has been given to non-clan members before, rarely." "Tell him yes," Tobias said. She told him. Orath nodded with the gravity of a man who had expected this answer and found it satisfactory, and said several more things. "He says your clan name is Greymoor Touched," Sharamph said, "because you smell of the moor and you walk it like you belong." "Greymoor Touched," Tobias said. He tasted it. "I can live with that." The smile that crossed her face was quick and warm and entirely undisguised, and several of the assembled hunters saw it, and looked between her and Tobias with expressions of private understanding. Sharamph did not seem to care that they saw. The weeks that followed were among the best of Tobias Keller's life, which was a sentence he would have found almost incomprehensible a month earlier, because he had not known he was capable of a life that felt like this. He filed his North Moor survey with the Dunmore Commission and received back a formal authorization for a permanent boundary liaison post, the first such post on the North Moor in 12 years. He wrote back accepting it. He moved his few practical possessions from the Dunmore Company lodgings to the way station, which was a short process because his possessions were not numerous. Field kit, marking logs, a small collection of carved stone he had picked up from the moor over 3 years because the shape of them pleased him, a spare cloak, and a letter from his mother that was 4 years old, and that he kept because she had been dead for 3 years and it was the last one. He looked at the way station when he had these things arranged in it and thought about what she had said about stopping calculating when he would leave. He also thought about the door. The door was wrong for her. She ducked every time. He watched her do it, the sharp automatic drop of her chin, the perfect muscle memory of years of low doors and built things that were not built for her, and the familiarity of it, the way she had simply stopped noticing it, lodged in his chest like a splinter. He was a border scout, not a stonemason, but 3 years of moorland ranging meant he knew how to work stone well enough to do practical things, and what he needed to do was not complicated. It was a matter of lifting the lintel by the right amount and reshaping the entrance, which meant breaking the existing stone cleanly and setting a new one. He could do it. It would take 2 days and a good chisel, and the leverage knowledge that any man who moved heavy things across moors for a living had accumulated by necessity. He did it while she was at the war camp for 2 days of clan obligations, working alone in the gray morning light with the chisel, and a shaped piece of the same dark moorstone that the original structure was built from, which he had quarried from a natural break in the ridge face, carrying it down in 2 trips with the pack sling. He mortared the new lintel in with the lime and clay mixture he had seen the clan stoneworkers use on the camp walls, working it careful and tight, and he checked his measurement 3 times against the mark he had taken, the soft press of her entering through the way station door when she was wearing her full height, chin dropped, the exact clearance he needed to correct. He built it 4 inches higher than that. Not just enough. Enough and then some. enough to walk through without having to think about it. He was finishing the last of the mortar work when he heard her footsteps on the approach path. She came through the standing stone corridor and stopped. She looked at the door frame. It was the same door, the same stone walls, the same threshold she had crossed 100 times, ducking her chin to her chest. And the lintel was gone, replaced by a new piece of dark moorstone, the mortar still faintly pale at its edges where it had not yet fully cured, set high and clean and deliberate. She stood still on the path for a long moment. Then she walked to the door and she straightened all the way, head up, chin level, her full height, and she walked through. She walked through the door without ducking. Just walked through it, upright, and stood inside in the center of the way station with her head not bowed and her hands loose at her sides, and the gray morning light came in clean behind her. Then she turned and came back out and ran her hand along the door frame slow, from the standing column on the left all the way across the new lintel, her long green-gray fingers reading the line of it, the join between old stone and new, the careful work of it. She felt the mortar still tacky at the upper edge, and looked at her fingertips, and looked at the stone, and looked at him. He was standing 10 feet away with mortar on his hands and a chisel still in his belt, and he had no prepared words for this. He had not prepared words because words were not the point. The door was the point. It had always been the point. She was very still. "You measured," she said. It was not a question. 3 times. She pressed her palm flat against the lintel, not gripping, just holding it, the full span of her hand, the way you hold something you want to feel the full weight of. "When did you do this?" she asked. "The last 2 days, while I was at the camp." "Yes." She was quiet for a long time. He waited. "Tobias." She said his name the way she said it when she meant it entirely. "No one has ever," she stopped. She was not a woman who stopped easily, and the stopping was its own kind of telling. He walked across the 10 feet between them, and when he was close, he put his mortar-dirty hands against her face very carefully, not minding the mess, and looked up at her. "You have been ducking through every door you have ever come to," he said. "Not here, not anymore." She turned her face into one of his hands. It was the smallest movement he had ever seen her make, and it was the most open. He felt the warm weight of her jaw in his palm and her breath against his wrist. "I am keeping you," she said, very quietly. "Good," he said. She kissed him then, slow and certain, and he wrapped his arms around her as far as they went, and she wrapped hers around him completely, and the door stood open behind them into the gray morning, and the moor was wide and old and theirs. The remaining 2 months of the survey commission passed in a density of good work and good company that Tobias filed away in the same deep place. He kept the things he did not want to lose. They mapped the full North Moor boundary. They tracked and documented 3 new predator species that had moved into the hollow-stalker territory. They identified 2 safe passes through the high ridge that would give the clan winter access to the pine forests without triggering the border lord boundary protocols, and Tobias filed the route documentation in the most meticulous report of his career. He also learned clan speech, slowly, badly, with enormous effort and Sharamph's patient, occasionally incredulous corrections. He learned it because she spoke it at home, at the way station, which was home, and because Oreth had begun to include him in war camp conversations that were partly in common speech and partly not, and because he wanted to understand everything she said, including the things she said that were not for him but that filled the air around her. She caught him practicing one morning when he thought she was still asleep, sitting at the table with his marking log open, mouthing the clan speech words he had written out phonetically in the margins. She sat in silence for a full minute watching him and then said, in perfect clan speech, "Your vowels are a disaster." In his best clan speech, without looking up from the log, "Thank you for your encouragement." The pause that followed was the longest she had ever let a not quite a laugh turn into an actual laugh, deep and real and completely unguarded, and it filled the way station the way good things fill small, warm spaces, and he sat at the table with her laughter around him and felt something in his chest ease that he had not realized had been tight. The season turned. The moor took on the long amber color of late autumn, the heather going rust and gold, the mist coming in earlier and staying later. Tobias cut extra firewood and banked it against the way station's east wall. Sharamph brought provisions from the war camp. The clan's winter surplus was generous this year, the first year in 3 that the North Moor had been fully accessible for the autumn hunt, and Oreth had allocated way station supply as a formal matter. They were no secret in the camp. They had not been a secret since the council meeting, and if there were clan members who had reservations, those reservations had been mostly displaced by the practical evidence of what the partnership had produced. The North Moor was documented. The hollow-stalker pride was gone. The storm bear was gone. The Boundary Liaison Commission was funded. These were real things that the clan could measure. Privately, Tobias thought some of them were also watching Sharamph, who had been Harak's second blade for 4 years and had carried the weight of that since Dunrock Crossing, and who was now, not lighter exactly, that was not quite the word but present in a different way, more there in some quality that was visible if you knew her. He knew her. On an evening in the middle of the amber season, sitting outside the way station door in the last of the light with their backs against the warm stone, she said, "You know what the oldest claiming right of the clan is? Tell me." "It is older than the war customs, older than the council system." She was looking at the moor, her profile clean against the amber sky. When a Greymoor warrior finds the person they intend to keep, they declare it before witnesses. In the old tradition, they name everything they are offering and everything they are asking. The witnesses are the record. She paused. It is not a ceremony in the human sense. It is a declaration. "And what does the other person do?" he asked. "Accepts or refuses?" She glanced at him. "There is no pressure in it. Refusing is honored. Choosing is honored. Only dishonesty is not." He looked at the moor and the amber sky and the standing stones going dark at the edges of the light. "Is this something you are considering?" He asked carefully. The amber eyes found his. "It is something I have been considering for a while," she said. "I wanted you to know what it was before I decided." He held her gaze. "And have you decided?" "Not yet," she said. "Soon." He nodded. He did not press. He looked at the moor and felt her shoulder warm against his and heard the curlews calling on the wind and thought that he had never in his life been less worried about soon. Soon came on a clear, cold morning 11 days later, when the first frost had laid itself across the heather, and the moor was brilliant and hard-edged under a sky so blue it looked newly made. Oreth came to the way station personally, which was unusual, and with him came 5 members of the hunting council and 2 elder women of the clan who Tobias had seen at the war camp but not spoken to. They arranged themselves in a loose half-circle on the frost-bright ground in front of the way station door. Sharamph stepped out through the door, upright, head clear of the lintel by 4 easy inches. She stood in the morning light in her warrior's leathers, her dark hair braided back formally in the full clan warrior's style, and looked at Tobias where he stood at the edge of the circle. Her expression was the clearest he had ever seen it. Nothing held back. She crossed to him, and in front of the witnesses she went to one knee. It was not a gesture of submission. He understood immediately from the way she did it and from the ambient shift in the watchers around them that it was something else entirely, a deliberate presentation, a formal declaration of intent, the warrior coming down to the eye level of the person they were naming. Coming level. Meeting, not diminishing. He was very still. "In the oldest custom of my clan," she said, in the careful common speech she used when she needed him to miss nothing, "I name what I offer. I offer my hunting strength and my knowledge of this ground. I offer my loyalty, which has no condition on it. I offer you a name in this clan and a place on this moor and a hearth that is your own." Her amber eyes held his without a flicker of uncertainty. "I offer the rest of my seasons, Tobias Keller, if you will take them." The moor was very quiet. The frost sparkled on the heather and the standing stones were tall and still, and the witnesses were perfectly silent. "And what do you ask?" he said, because she had told him that was part of it. "I ask that you stay on firm ground," she said, and the corner of her mouth moved on the last 3 words, the words they both knew, and he heard in them everything they had been to each other since the mist morning when she had said it first and he had run anyway. He crouched down to her level. He put both hands on either side of her face, and she was kneeling and he was crouching, and they were eye to eye, and the world was very large around them, and he was not afraid of any of it. "I accept everything you are offering," he said, "and I ask only one thing. Name it. That you keep walking through every door you want to walk through, head up." The witnesses saw the whole of her face change. Saw the warrior who had been composed and certain become, for one completely visible moment, the woman she was when no one was looking, open and sure and lit from inside and choosing and chosen. She put her forehead against his. "Yes," she said. Behind them, Orath said something short and resonant in clan speech, the kind of thing that closes a formal declaration. The witnesses responded, a low unified sound that was agreement and acknowledgement and record, all at once. The frost sparkled on the heather. The moor was vast and cold, and theirs, north to the pine ridges and south to the old standing stones, and the way station door stood open behind them with its new lintel set clean in the morning light. She rose from her knee and he rose with her, and she kissed him in front of the witnesses, and Orath, who was not unpleasant as she had said, made a sound that was clearly the clan equivalent of satisfied, and the two elder women exchanged a look that needed no translation. They ate together after. The clan had brought food, the good dense winter provisions, dried meat and hard cheese and the dark sweet flatbread, and someone had carried up a skin of the moorberry mead that the clan made in autumn. They ate outside in the cold, clear morning because the way station was not large enough for all of them, and no one seemed to mind the frost. There was conversation, some in common speech for his benefit and some in clan speech, and more of the latter he could follow than he had been able to 3 months ago, which made Sharamph look at him with quiet satisfaction each time he did. The council members spoke to him as a matter of course, not as a guest or an anomaly, and the elder women told Sharamph things he did not entirely catch, but that made her laugh twice. And Orath told him, with the blunt seriousness of a man delivering high praise, that the Northmoor Survey report was the most useful document the clan had received from human sources in 20 years. Tobias thanked him and meant it. When the party went back up the ridge in the late morning, the moor returned to the two of them. He sat against the way station door and watched the frost melt off the heather, and she sat beside him with her shoulder against his and her long fingers wrapped around the mead cup. "Greymoor touched," she said. "That is my name," he agreed. "You belong to the moor now," she said, "and to the clan." He turned to look at her. "And to you?" "Yes," she did not add anything to that, the word was complete. "And I to you." He leaned his head back against the door frame. Above him the lintel held, new and dark and solid, exactly where he had put it. She noticed. She looked up at it and back at him, and her thumb moved across his knuckles where his hand lay open on his knee, a slow, deliberate press. "You knew," she said, "when you built it. I knew that you deserved a door that was built right for you. Everything else I hoped. And if I had gone south in the end, gone back to clan territory," he considered this honestly, "I would have gone with you." She was quiet for a moment. "You would have left the South Moor, your commission, your territory." "You are more worth following than the South Moor," he said simply. "You always were." She put her free hand against the back of his neck, that hold she had, careful and warm, and he felt the full weight of it, the deliberateness, and leaned into it. The moor stretched away from them in all directions, north and south, the frost-glittered heather rolling out toward the ridges and the standing stones, old and patient and indifferent to human reckoning. Somewhere on the wind, a curlew called. The mead was sweet and cold. The way station door stood open above them, lintel high and clean in the autumn light, and when they went inside later they would both walk through it without bending, and it would be nothing remarkable, and it would be everything. Tobias Keller, third-year border scout, lean and weathered and not impressive by the standards of any market or commission office or border company in the South, sat against the wall of the way station he now called home, On the moor he now shared with someone who could have chosen anyone and had chosen him, and felt the simple, total weight of being known. She had run her hand along the lintel he had built for her, and she had walked through it upright, and she had kneeled in front of witnesses and named him hers, and she was here beside him now with the moor at their feet, and the season turning cold and plenty of winter ahead and all of it, every bitter and good piece of it. Worth every step that had brought him to this gray-green moorland where the mist came in at dawn and the standing stones watched everything, and the woman beside him was the most extraordinary thing in any compass direction, and she had said yes. The curlew called again, further off now, moving north. "Come inside," she said. "The cold is coming in." He stood and offered her his hand, and she took it. They walked through the door together.